Hi. This week's First Chapter Friday is Accountable, the true story of a racist social media account and the teenagers whose lives it changed by Dashka Slater. So this is a true story. This is a narrative nonfiction story by the same author who wrote The 57 Bus. And I'm going to read you the foreword because it kind of explains why they wrote the book and kind of give you a little bit of background that way. So it starts with two quotes. The first one says, being called all manner of things from the dictionary of shame, not English, not words, not heard, but worn, borne, carried, never spent. We now feel a largeness coming on, something passing into us. Tracy K. Smith. And the second one, how do we hold people accountable for wrongdoing and yet at the same time remain in touch with their humanity enough to believe that they're in their capacity to be transformed? Bell Hooks. Author's note and content warning. I was at a March 2017 North California booksellers event, signing advance copies of my first nonfiction narrative, The 57 Bus, when someone asked me if I'd heard about the racist social media account that had just been discovered at Albany High School. That question ended up launching the 4-year reporting journey that produced this book. At the time, I had no plans to write another book about teenagers and hate. Far from it. Researching and writing my last book had been harrowing. I was hoping to find a sunnier topic for my next one. But what had happened in Albany wasn't an isolated occurrence. When I looked into it, I saw that there had been a dramatic uptick in bias-related incidents since 2016, particularly at schools. A report by the Southern Poverty Law Center documented 3,265 such incidents at K-12 schools nationwide in the fall of 2018 alone. My 3 decades as a criminal justice reporter and my 5 years in the restorative justice community have persuaded me that, as a society, we can't prevent what we don't understand. True justice requires listening, with curiosity and compassion, to the human stories behind the headlines. Only then can we begin to repair what's gone wrong and reach for what's right. This is a true story about real people. While reporting it, I generated hundreds of hours of interviews, read thousands of pages of legal documents, and investigated every aspect of a story that had dozens of participants and just as many perspectives. The people who agreed to be interviewed did so in the hope that something good would come out of something terrible. They have given you their story in the hope that you will treat it with care. Not everyone involved in these events wanted their stories told, of course, and I abided by the wishes of those who didn't. Most of the people in this book were teenagers when the events occurred. For that reason, both they and their parents are identified by pseudonyms, and some identifying details have been omitted or changed. All other adults are identified by their real names. The story was reconstructed from a variety of sources, including interviews with the participants, public records, police reports, emails, texts, direct messages, videos, photographs, diaries, and social media posts, as well as my own firsthand observations. To report key events while including as many perspectives as possible, I relied upon court records, proceedings, and decisions. Quotes from all sources are verbatim, except where the names or other identifying details have been replaced, or in a few instances where a clarifying word or phrase had been added at the speaker's request. More information about sourcing is at the back of the book. And then there's a content warning that talks about there are some things in this book that would be potentially triggering for people because it's a true story and because of the nature of some of the social media content. So there are some references to racist, sexist, anti-Semitic, and ableist memes, images, language, and incidents, as well as some references to suicide and disordered eating. And then it goes on to give you some information that says if you or someone you know are having thoughts of suicide or self-harm, call or text 988 to reach the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. In this section, I'm not going to read anything that includes that. Prologue. Looking back, it's hard not to wonder how the whole thing could have been prevented. all the sorrow, all the fear, all the rage, all the lives derailed, all the milestones missed, all the plans upended, the hearings, the lawsuits, the brokenness that settled over everyone involved, the undefinable and uncountable losses, the friendships wrecked, the optimism withered, the joy stolen. Somebody could have spoken up before it went so far, before the entire town was shattered. But who? The people closest to it were caught up in the group's centripetal force, the whirl of jokes and banter that kept them all together. To speak up would have meant risking being thrown out of the orbit. At the time, that was the worst thing any of them could imagine, being mocked by the group, being exiled, being alone. But just because it felt impossible to say something doesn't mean it was. Any of those top dogs in the group could have done it, or even someone on the periphery who couldn't have been shamed into shutting up. It wouldn't have required any long speeches or dramatic pronouncements. Just one phrase would have done the trick. Dude, this is really effed up. Part 1, before. And then there's a section here that shows the sort of circles of friends so that you kind of know who the characters are, who the people were that were involved in this. Smallbany. People in town called it Smallbany. It was just under 2 square miles, bordered by the city of Berkeley to the south and east, by the gray-blue waters of the bay on the west, and by the town of El Cerrito to the north. In 2017, Albany had just under 20,000 residents, so that's actually pretty similar in size to Colchester. Residents who counted themselves lucky to live in a place that seemed to offer the sophistication of the metropolitan Bay Area combined with the intimacy of a small town. So this is near San Francisco. Of course, it was exclusive when you considered the cost of housing, but it wasn't one of those fancy suburbs with gated subdivisions and sprawling McMansions. Albany felt like a funky little backwater. The town had 2 main thoroughfares, Solano Avenue, a pedestrian boulevard, peppered with small boutiques and restaurants, and San Pablo Avenue, a charmless state highway lined with car dealerships and insurance offices and dive bars. The homes were mostly stucco bungalows and wood-shingled homes, and in 2017, the first year of Donald Trump's presidency, many were beginning to plant "In this house we believe" signs in their yards to signify that they were part of what was then being called the resistance, and thought that Black Lives Matter, women's rights are human rights, and kindness is everything. The town had a horse racing track and a bowling alley and a 310-foot hill that humped abruptly from the flatlands like the back of a dinosaur. It had a tiny bayfront beach and an odd 33-acre open space called the Albany Bulb, a former dump for construction debris that had functioned at various times as a homeless encampment, a makeshift museum for graffiti art and scrap metal sculptures, a marshland habitat, and a dog walking trail. Almost half the residents were white and more than a quarter were Asian. 13% were Latinx. You could call it diverse, and probably did if you were white, but it didn't feel diverse to its Black residents, who made up just under 3% of the population and whose numbers were shrinking all the time. It wasn't that diverse economically either. Regardless of race, most of the residents were professionals with college degrees. Still, there was something comforting about living in a like-minded community at a time when so much of America seemed to be embracing bigotry and prejudice. And even if you didn't love Albany, even if you missed being in a bigger and busier pond, you would stay until your children graduated from high school, because the schools were Albany's crown jewel. 3 elementary schools, 1 middle school, 1 high school. 41% of the town's 7,661 household units contained at least 1 kid, a kid whose parents had shoehorned themselves into whatever dwelling they could afford so that their child could snag a seat at one of the district's desks. Small schools where your children wouldn't get lost. Challenging schools where your kid could get the best education. If you were one of Albany's 1,129 high school students, you knew that you were lucky to be there. In 2017, your role was spelled out in a page-length poem in the high school yearbook that offered a breathless torrent of instructions for incoming students. Work hard, make your parents proud. Families rent Albany homes just so their kids can go to school here. The prize at the end? College. And not just any college, a good college. Subconsciously, your self-worth is partly defined by where you go to college, one white girl remembers. Everyone was competitive and wanted to stand out. Our whole grade was fierce with college and academics. If you were black, the pressure was even more intense. While the percentage of white and black students nationwide who got their education from community colleges about equal, black students were about one-third less likely to graduate from a public four-year university, a discrepancy fed by differences in both income and access. I always told myself, I can't leave here going to a community college. Albany is at the top. Everyone leaving here is going to a four-year. I need to be going to a four-year just like everyone else, a black girl recalls. I had that in my head. I can't be one of those black girls who doesn't graduate, doesn't go straight to a four-year. I need to get my SAT scores high, my ACT scores high. I always felt like I was competing against everyone else. Sleepovers. Charles was a kid who floated, drifting from room to room like a half-filled balloon, neither soaring nor sinking. He was hard to pigeonhole because he was so often contradictory. At 17, he was still more boy than man, tall but not yet filled out, good-looking but not yet handsome. He was smart enough to take advanced classes like AP Computer Science and AP Physics, but not motivated enough to get better than B's or C's. Intensely social but also kind of shy, obnoxious but also sweet. Naturally athletic but more interested in playing League of Legends than in playing basketball. His core friends were a tight-knit group of a half dozen or so boys, most of whom he'd been close to since middle school or even earlier. They were the class clowns and the envelope pushers, the ones who said stuff at school that made people laugh but was also out of pocket. The ones who couldn't stop talking in class, far more focused on cracking each other up than they were on whatever they were supposed to be learning. Most of his friends would rather play video games than go to a party, but Charles sometimes went to parties too. In middle school, he dated a mixed South and East Asian girl named Sita, a relationship that mainly consisted of sending each other's texts and Facebook messages and occasionally going to the movies together. In a Facebook post, she listed the reasons that she liked him. He was cute, nice, smart, funny, and Korean. Both of Charles' parents were born in Korea. His mom had moved to the U.S. as an adult while his dad came as a baby. By high school, the two were just friends, but they still hung out a lot, and Charles had gotten close with Sita's friend group, particularly two black girls named Lolia and Tiana, who were also tight when Charles's friend Murphy, who was biracial, Mexican and white. On weekends, they often slept over at Charles's house. The house was the perfect party spot because Charles's mother and stepfather made themselves scarce. The kids could close the sliding doors that separated the living room from the rest of the house and play truth or dare or pong, screaming with laughter at the stupid things they could make each other do. There was a fire pit in the backyard at the top of the steep hillside, and sometimes they'd hang out there. When Charles was drinking, his friends occasionally glimpsed signs that things weren't okay with him. Sometimes he'd sit and talk earnestly with one of the girls, his eyes filling with tears, as he confessed how angry he felt most of the time. Other times he was reckless and goofy, filled with frenetic energy, as if daring himself to cross some invisible line. Once, when the fire in the backyard pit was at a full blaze, Charles decided to jump over it. Somehow he managed to sail over the flames and land on the other side, unscarred, but it just as easily could have gone the other way. Free fall. My mom would say it made me better, Andrea says, about growing up in Albany, and she's not necessarily wrong. She remembers feeling out of place as far back as the third grade, and that feeling intensified when she went to high school. She was biracial, with a black father and a white mother, and she wasn't the kind of girl that Albany boys seemed to like. Those girls wore Lululemon leggings, tossed their long straight hair over their shoulders, laughed when boys teased them or put them down. Those girls were smart enough to get into a good college, but not so smart they made people uncomfortable. If Andrea didn't fit that mold, it wasn't for lack of trying. She even bought a pair of Lululemon leggings, explaining to anyone who asked why they were worth the money, but she was never going to be one of those girls. It just wasn't it wasn't just her curly hair or light brown skin, her low voice. It was something in the way she held herself, like a train carrying dangerous cargo. Still, she seemed to have it all together. When asked to describe her, her friends used words like strong, sarcastic, funny, straightforward. She was competitive on the soccer team, probably a little more aggressive than was called for at times, but it felt good to send another girl tumbling to the ground. Yet, when her coaches barked instructions, pushing her to be faster and better, she would vanish inward, closing the door behind her. Because no matter how strong and self sufficient she looked, she wasn't actually okay. She was falling, had been falling since the summer before high school, and what she looked forward to most of all each day was the moment she got home from school. That was when she could change out of her clothes and into a bathrobe, make herself an elaborate snack, climb up into the loft bed in her room with her laptop and stay there, her face close to the wall, the ceiling inches above her, a fox huddled in her den. That was when she could watch Netflix for 8 hours straight, sinking into whatever storyline presented itself. Lost, Orange is the New Black, Vampire Diaries, Friends, Grey's Anatomy, New Girl, The 100. The particulars of the show didn't matter as long as it was someone else's life, someone else's drama, someone else completely. So that's just the beginning of Accountable. And I think you can kind of see, I feel like this is a really, really important book because the things that happen in this book are the kinds of things that could happen almost anywhere. I mean, you probably could tell just by the descriptions of the town and of the kids that it sounds like just about any lots of different kinds of towns. It sounds like the students sound just like any, kind of kid that you probably know. So it's really interesting what happened here. And it's really interesting to kind of hear about the things that happened and the mistakes were made and kind of the ideas of what could be done for the rest of us going forward to try to make our school a better place. So I hope you check out Accountable when you get a chance at our school library.